Hello, I'm James Cusack. I'm the Chief Executive of Autistica, which is the UK's leading autism research and campaigning charity. I'm also autistic myself, and I've worked in autism research and policy and directly with autistic people.
Hi, it's
Hi.
Tracy Abbott from Microlink. It's wonderful to meet you.
Thank you.
We wanted to have a quick talk with you today about your involvement in Sir Robert Buckland's review of the employment gap with autistic people. And I understand it's quite huge, and you're going to be doing a review with him. And what was your involvement? How did you get involved initially?
So Robert and I have been talking for some time about how we can best ensure that autistic people can live a better life. And one of the biggest barriers that we know that autistic people face is in terms of employment. And we've got good data on this actually that shows, depending on what year you look at, between about 2 in 10 to 3 in 10 autistic people are currently in work, which means that
Only 2 in 10?
Yeah, which
Wow.
means that between 8 in 10 and 7 in 10 of autistic people
Aren't.
are not in work. And so we want to understand why that's the case, because we know that accessing work allows you to have your own independence.
Yeah.
Access to quality of life is an enabler of better health outcomes.
Yeah.
And also affects really quite major things like life expectancy.
Is there a kind of an average age for individuals getting into work, for example?
Well, I think it differs for different autistic people, and of course there's a huge number of autistic people who we know don't even know that they're autistic.
Oh, so they don't even suspect. It's not a question of not having a diagnosis. They don't even think that they need a diagnosis.
Well, they're not even aware, or they might be suspect that they are, but they haven't gone through the process of getting a diagnosis. What we want to have happen is for the autistic people who are going through childhood and young adulthood to feel that that world of work is accessible to them. And so what we're trying to do is to create working environments which will enable that to be the case. And the truth is, we are actually finding some really exciting and evidence-based and impactful ways that will enable us to ensure that's the case. And there's many examples of how we can do this effectively for organisations and businesses of all sorts.
But you had an example, didn't you? Could you share a bit about what you did with Deutsche Bank, for example?
So one of the things that we did with Deutsche Bank was we led an evaluation, which was really about a research project, which was really about trying to understand how internship schemes would work within the business. It's really important. It's very easy to do things like an internship scheme, but it's important to understand what does and doesn't work. And as a research charity, that's something that we're really, really passionate about. So we did what we call a qualitative research study with them, which is that we try to understand in quite a comprehensive ways the views and experiences of the autistic people involved in the internship scheme, and all of the staff from Deutsche Bank who were working closely with the autistic interns as well. And what we found was that the experience was overwhelmingly positive.
Oh, wonderful.
For everyone involved. Yeah. But also there were some complexities that they maybe didn't realise about, and that it was a huge learning experience for the organisation. And what we are trying to do, hopefully through this review, is to ensure that the learnings which have been generated both at Deutsche Bank but across the UK and across the world are readily available to businesses. Because if you can get this right, and if you can understand how to change the working environment, your approach to recruitment, how you manage autistic people, make adjustments for autistic people, there's a huge opportunity for autistic people to access work, but it's also a huge opportunity for businesses to create a more diverse workforce, but also a more talented workforce, which will only help to improve performance.
James, I wanted to talk to you about the fact that you're the first openly autistic individual as a CEO of a charity. How did that come about? Not how did it come about you're autistic, but how did you get to be a CEO? What's the charity all about?
So, well, I was diagnosed as being autistic when I was 12, but it was pretty well understood that from quite a young age that I was different developmentally. So I went to a specialist nursery from quite a young age, and I guess being autistic, and then I ended up in a base for children who were on the autism spectrum as a teenager, and getting that support put me in a very fortunate position, because it enabled me to go on to achieve the qualifications which at one point we didn't necessarily think I was going to go on to achieve.
Great.
But it also created a huge passion for me around how we improve outcomes for all autistic people. So I grew up alongside a number of autistic people in Aberdeen, and I often think about their lives and about the things that we need to do to ensure that we remove barriers for all the different types of autistic people that we know exist. And so I worked, I did a degree and a PhD at the University of Aberdeen looking at autism, and a postdoc, but I'd also been involved in autism policy, worked directly with autistic people in a range of different roles, had then been approached by Autistica about being their director of research, and did that role for 5 years, so helped implement the first autism network, autism research network, and looked at some quite key initiatives around really big serious issues like early death and autism, understanding research priorities for autistic people and their families, and then the chief executive position became available, and it was a fully open process, and I applied for it, and I was lucky enough to be given the job. And it's very, very exciting from my perspective, because there's a huge amount to do. Since I've become chief executive, we've set really ambitious goals for what we'd like to see society achieve for autistic people. So we've got 6 ambitious 2030 goals. One of them is focused on employment and how we believe that it should be possible to double the rate of employment for autistic people by 2030.
Can I ask, what is the employment rate? Because I'm aware for people with learning difficulties, for example, we're looking at probably as low as 5 to 7%. I think it's a little higher for people with autism. So
according to figures from the ONS, it varies somewhere between 2 in 10 and 3 in 10 of autistic people are currently in work. And so we're really lucky now. We have quite good data which will help us to understand this issue and to track how as a society we're making progress towards closing that gap. Just to draw a comparison, we know that 5 in 10 of disabled people are currently in work, and 8 out of 10 of the general population are currently accessing work. So we have a long way to go to try and bridge that gap for autistic people, but there are huge opportunities and things that we can do that will enable us to bridge that gap.
How do you, as Autistica, how do you actually engage with companies yourself? Is it purely on the research side?
So we do a range of different, we engage with organisations in a range of different ways. So first of all, we have our research projects that we're working on. So we have initiatives specifically testing different solutions for working with autistic people. We're creating an index which will be which in the first instance will be freely available, which we're looking at implementing to measure how different companies can change their employment practices and benefit from the available evidence that's out there to try and create some real momentum. The reality is there's amazing amounts of good practice going on across the UK and across the world, and we want to make sure that everyone has it available and able to implement, because when we talk with companies around this, we see a huge degree of excitement around this area, but also a certain degree of anxiety as well. And so what we want to do is remove that anxiety and to help them to understand how they can really make sustainable changes. So I think in terms of where we are with autism, we're in many ways we're at the foothills, and this is a very new area, and relative to other areas, we need to build awareness, and we need to build intent to act, and we need to build action as well. And there's a huge opportunity to do that within the context of this review, to remove barriers to employers, to make employment more accessible to autistic people. And there are very simple things we can do by providing practical recommendations around how we can improve recruitment processes, how we can make sure that reasonable adjustments are made and are more accessible to people, that autistic people are retained within employment, and to ensure that they're actually ultimately thriving as well. So I think what we want to see is that evidence being implemented and being made available to organisations. I think also what we need to do, what we need to to help create for this review is a cycle of progress, and I guess I talked earlier about a legacy of change as well, so making sure we're creating that cycle of learning as well. I think is absolutely key, because that will be what helps us to build momentum and to help us in a continuous way reduce the inequalities in terms of access to employment that we know that autistic people are facing. And I think another key thing within this is hopefully we can create a more personalised understanding for every autistic person needs to, because we know that every autistic person is different and has different support needs. So beginning to create models which will help us to understand that, I think, would be really, really key.